Welcome to The Corner Table, a Capital Times podcast about food and drink in Madison. As much as I totally want an Instant Pot and I love my KitchenAid, there are only a few essential tools that I really need in my kitchen. One of them is a good, sharp chef's knife. Isaiah Schroeder is a Madison-based artist and craftsman who makes knives that are as beautiful as they are functional. I am your host, Cap Times food writer Lindsay Christians. I've been admiring Isaiah's gorgeous knives for a couple of years now at pop-ups like the Good Day Market. So I was really excited to chat with him about what makes his knives special. Enjoy! So Isaiah, welcome.
Hi, Lindsay. Thanks.
Thanks for coming in today. So first of all, just maybe introduce yourself a little bit and tell us how you started making knives.
Sure. So my name's Isaiah Schroeder. I have a business in Madison making chef knives. And I got started getting into knives in 2010. I was working as a furniture maker for Richard Judd in Paoli, Wisconsin. And Mark and Sue, who own chefknives2go.com, they came into the shop looking for somebody to make some wooden handles for knives that they import from Japan. I took the job as an after-hours sort of thing and was doing that for a while and just got really interested in the whole process and everything that goes into making knives.
So the handles that you were making for them then, were they fairly basic or did you get kind of started with the artistic elements fairly quickly?
Some of both. I was always interested in pushing it to be the most interesting that I could make it. But yeah, there was a fair call for just basic knives too.
When you think about the shape of a knife, can you give us just a tiny kind of rundown of what all the parts are called, just so that we're all talking about the same things?
Well, basically there's the blade and the handle, and beyond that there's descriptors for all different parts of the blade, like the edge, the spine. There's the choil, which is the part that comes down from the handle. It's got a little curve that goes from the handle down to the edge.
Do most knives have the blade going all the way through the handle, or is that different knife by knife?
Yeah, so there are two different kinds. It's separated by Western or Japanese style or Wa-style handles. Western-style handles have the tang going all the way through, and usually there's a piece of wood on either side of that, and those are called scales. Japanese-style knives enclose the tang completely, and it's called a stick tang.
What kind do you make?
I make mostly Wa-style handles,
So
Japanese
the
style.
Japanese style.
Yeah.
Why do you prefer that?
That's just what I started doing and enjoy the form.
How did you learn? So did you just sort of teach yourself how to do this?
I did. There's so much information available online. YouTube, and there's these forums where knife makers discuss their techniques, and so much available out there.
One of the things that's really eye-catching about your knives is some of the patterns that you get in those. How do you make the patterns in the blade?
There's a whole process involved with that. For something like a Damascus knife, I start with 2 different steels in a raw bar stock and stack them in alternating layers. And I take that stack and heat it up in the forge until it's yellow heat. When it's reached temperature, then I hammer those together, and that process is called forge welding. And then it's a solid piece of metal after that. And I can take that and twist it or hammer it more or cut it and restack it and grind grooves into it and make different patterns.
That's really
in that
cool.
way.
So you said the yellow heat. Is
Yeah.
that just an indicator of temperature?
It is, yeah. It's about 2300 degrees is where I want it to be. Very hot.
That's crazy. Do you have to protect your body?
Yeah, I wear leather gloves and I wear long sleeve shirts and pants that don't catch on fire.
It sounds like maybe more fun in the winter.
It is, definitely.
Where's your forge? Where do you do your work?
My forge is off of Gilson Street, right next to Funk Factory Gazaria, if you know where they are. And yeah, it's right behind my house. It's a good setup.
And do you have any kind of collaboration with them?
I do, yeah. They give me beer all the time, which is awesome. And I've actually used some of their beer to etch the steel on one of my knives.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
really cool.
And I get wine barrels from them too and use that for handle material sometimes.
The handles are really striking looking. And so are you using different woods? How do you get those different colors? And
Yeah, I get wood from all around the world. Some of it comes from Australia. Quite a bit of it does, actually. And all the wood I use is stabilized, which is a process that makes the wood more durable, more waterproof, and stronger. I combine that with different metals and different other materials like reconstituted stone and just try to pair them all together to look really good with the blade that it's going on.
Has your process evolved since you first started doing these? Have you found yourself like, I'm really interested in this particular wood or this style since you started making knives?
Yeah, I would say so. I have a particular Damascus pattern that I make the most often, which is called a lazy twist. I just really enjoy the way it looks, the boldness of the pattern. And so I've done that one the most often.
Are these meant to be on the wall and beautiful, or are they meant to be used?
They're definitely meant to be used. They're designed to cut really efficiently and well. They might not take as much abuse as like Henkel's knife or a factory knife, but they're going to cut a lot easier and be something that you'd want to use for 8 hours a day.
For sure. Are there things that maybe you wouldn't want to use the knife for, like bones?
Definitely. Yeah, they would not be. I mean, there are different knives for different tasks. So I could make a thicker, heavier knife with a geometry for cutting bones. Most of the knives I make are for general slicing purposes, like cutting vegetables or proteins.
So I'm curious, what makes your knives different than my Henkel's?
Yeah, well, it's pretty similar to food, and you can pretty easily make a cheeseburger that's way better than like McDonald's could, just by using better ingredients and taking more care and time in making it. Better steel and better heat treat, and that allows for a thinner geometry. And a knife is like a wedge. If you go to push it through something like a potato, the thicker that wedge is, the harder it's going to be to push through there. So small changes in the geometry can have a very big difference in how the knife cuts.
If someone is using your knife regularly, how do you recommend that they sharpen it? Could they use an at-home sharpener? Would you want them to take it to a shop?
I recommend using water stones. There are some at-home sharpeners that work well. You have to be pretty careful with them. Some of them will chew up your knives. So that's something to watch out for. I've been using one called the Work Sharp Culinary that works really well because it uses grinding belts, which are the same things that I use in my shop to make the knives. But water stones, if you're willing to master the technique, are definitely the best way to get a sharp knife.
Is that something that you do sort of manually?
Yeah. It's basically rubbing the knife on a stone.
I have a honing steel. It helps a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't help. It's not magic. But I feel like one of the most common problems with people's knives in their kitchens is really just dull knives.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing the difference. Like my husband will take the knife, every month or so and just get it professionally sharpened because we don't have an at-home sharpener.
Sure.
When he brings it back, it's like a whole new knife.
Yeah, it makes a big difference.
It's a huge difference.
So with my knives, I'm actually willing to resharpen them for free. If anybody buys a knife from me, you bring it into the shop and I'll sharpen it for you. Another thing is making the steel harder makes it more abrasion resistant, which means it doesn't need to be sharpened as often.
I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah.
So the knife that I use the most often at home when I'm cooking is it's a Western-made knife, but it's a santoku style because it has those little kind of gouges that helps things move off the blade.
Sure.
But I also kind of like the curve of it, and it's about 7 inches because I'm a 5'2" person,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't need a super long 10-inch chef's knife. It is interesting, though, because a santoku style and a chef's knife, they function a little bit differently on my cutting board. Do you make the different shapes and when people talk about what they're best used for?
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of different things that affect how you hold the knife and how you use it. The profile of the edge itself, it can be flatter or have more belly in it. And if you think about if it swoops up towards the tip, then that means you have to hold it up higher to use the tip on the cutting board. And it lets you get into smaller places with the finer tip like that. But a flatter profile will let you chop down, and you can chop a lot faster. So depending on whether you want to slice or chop or use the tip, you can adjust the thickness of the knife too, which makes suitable for different purposes.
I love my santoku for squash.
Mm-hmm.
I don't love it as much for chopping nuts, for example, because it doesn't have that kind of classic chef's knife shape.
The rocker kind of edge, yeah.
And I grew up, with that rocking style,
Sure.
chopping nuts for chocolate chip cookies with my mother. I rely very heavily on my santoku as kind of like an extension of my arm. So I'll choke up on it a lot and to get lots of control. Knife skills are one of those areas where if you learn a few things, it can open up a whole world. It can make things so much easier and faster in your kitchen.
Definitely. Yeah, so one of the things that I was taught was to use a pinch grip, which is where you actually have your hands on the blade of the knife, pretty far up on the blade. Like half of your hand is on the handle, the other half is on the blade. And that lets you have more control, and it kind of puts it in line with your arm and makes it more of an extension of your arm.
You make beautiful paring knives as well.
Thank you.
And I love those. And I feel like, they fit really nicely in your hand. And I wonder, when you were making them, did you think a little bit about those ergonomics of like how it's going to feel when you're using the knife?
I definitely did. Yeah, I was thinking about being able to make paring cuts with a paring knife so the blade could not be too wide and the handle would want to be nearly round, but not quite round. And I went through a few different iterations of that design.
When you're speaking with folks at like the Good Day Market, for example, and you're talking with people about your work, what kinds of questions do they have? Do they wonder why the knives are the price that they are? Do you have to kind of explain some of that?
The question I get asked the most is, how long does it take to make a knife? And for something like a Damascus knife, it takes about 40 hours. So it takes about a week. I usually have more than one going at a time, so I can make a few of them in a week. But it's a long process. All the forging and grinding and heat treating and everything, it's just, you can't take shortcuts with it.
What other styles do you make?
I have made quite a few sushi knives, Japanese-style single bevel knives. They're generally quite a bit thicker, and they have all of the bevel on one side of the knife. And that's made for more like slicing fish really cleanly, making really clean sushi cuts.
Do you know any chefs that use your knives?
Yeah, Patrick DePula here in Madison, who owns Salvador's Tomato Pies. He has 2 of my knives.
Do they stand up to heavy use in a kitchen?
I would think so.
I've had knives in my past that have broken, like where the blade comes apart from the handle. Is that something that's fixable if that happens to your knife?
Yeah. Typically what happens the most is a tip will break off, and that's something I can usually regrind, and the knife might be a little bit shorter, but definitely will still have a usable tip and, a good knife. So as far as the handle coming off of the knife, that's probably not going to happen on my knives. But if it does, I will totally fix it. My knives are guaranteed, so if they break, I will fix them.
What's next for you? You've been making knives now, you said full-time, for a couple of years?
If I'm still doing this in 5 years, I'd be very happy. I'm always going to try and push kind of the Damascus technology for me and make new patterns and try and find new ways to make interesting textures and patterns in the blades and match those with the handles. That's what I really enjoy the most.
Well, you brought some knives in here. Can we maybe take a look at them?
Sure, yeah. This one is called Ktip, which is Kiritsuke tip.
The patterns on the knife blade remind me of, like, have you seen the maps of the sea where they show depth?
Yeah, topographical map.
That's what it looks like. And the wood on the handle kind of, it almost has like a little bit of like an old parchment feel, or like a map kind of feel too. What kind of wood is it?
That is spalted tamarind.
What's the blue? There's a line of blue.
That is reconstituted turquoise.
It's gorgeous.
Thank you.
How long is this knife?
That is 240 millimeters.
Like a foot, maybe?
No, I think it's about a 9-inch knife, somewhere in there. Yeah, I mean, the Japanese convention is to use millimeters, and a lot of customers expect that, so that's why I stick with that.
How do you balance the weight? So how do you find kind of where the center of balance on the knife is?
Most people prefer to have it a little blade forward. So, like, if you're holding it in a pinch grip, it should be a little bit blade heavy.
The top edge of the knife, it's like trapezoidal almost, like it's like part of a triangle. It's very like a sharp edge there. Is that a particular style?
Yeah, that is the Kiritsuke tip, and it comes down at about a 45-degree angle, and it's very similar to the Santoku that you like because it's got a flat profile, but it also has a very fine point that you can use for detail work.
Getting in there with the edge there and finding where things split.
Yeah.
Do you cook with your knives?
I do, yeah. I have several in my kitchen.
That's gorgeous.
Thank you.
So I wonder, do you have, folks who sort of get one of your knives and then come back and buy others? And do you hear about people's experiences using them?
Yeah, I try to ask my customers for feedback as much as possible. I always like to know if there's something I can improve about it, or just to hear how they use it. That can help me make a better knife.
Are people usually using it as like a day-to-day workhorse? Do they use it as a specialty knife?
I think a lot of chefs will buy these as a workhorse knife because it's a high-performance knife and it will actually make their job easier on a day-to-day basis.
Do you think of yourself as an artist?
Yeah, I hope so. I like to try to be. I was always interested in design and how I could make things beautiful and functional at the same time. That was kind of what I was going for with furniture, and just extended that into knife making as well. I love it that they get used. I wouldn't want it any other way.
So where can people find your knives?
I have some knives for sale at Underground Butcher here in Madison, and some at Wisconsin Cutlery Supply on University Avenue, and occasionally on my website,
which is
SchroederKnifeworks.com. SchroederKnifeworks.
Awesome. Thank you. This is great. This is a beautiful knife. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I appreciate
it. This has been The Corner Table, a podcast about food and drink in Madison produced by the Capital Times. Our music was composed by Patrick Christians. Find photos of Isaiah's beautiful knives on Instagram at Schroeder Knifeworks. You can subscribe to The Corner Table wherever you get your podcasts, and follow us on Facebook at Corner Table Podcast. I am your host, Cap Times food writer Lindsay Christians, and my wish for you this week is a perfectly sliced onion. Remember, the sharper your knife, the less you cry. Stay warm, Madison. Cheers.